My name is Gregory DeShields, and I was born in 1958. Well, Haddonfield was probably the most notable area, although Camden County really served as the biggest. It was more of the stabilization of me as an adult. I had traveled and lived in New England. My family was originally from Philadelphia, but when we all started to move to New Jersey, Haddonfield just seemed like a real normal place if you wanted to have more of a stable life. So for me, the most notable thing was that it was as comfortable as your comfy slippers, whether you went to the grocery store or whether you went out for a nighttime stroll. But if it was one thing that really clearly comes to mind, it's without any doubt such an incredibly livable town. It's interesting. So my family were originally in Philadelphia. My father worked here in Camden County, and he always threatened to move us to New Jersey. Unfortunately, my mother made that dream come true. So we lived in Cherry Hill. I lived in Haddon Township for quite some time, but we moved to Haddonfield, or I specifically moved here in 1991. I lived here for about 12 years, and it was a great experience. I think what really stood out for me in 1991, I was still very young and was exploring what life was like and wanted to move into a community where I felt I could be myself and be comfortable. And despite what might have been happening in society, Haddonfield was a very welcoming community. And that's really what led me to choose here. Now, don't get me wrong. I'd lived in Haddon Township and Cherry Hill, so had, driven through Haddonfield for quite some time. I was always, impressed with all the architecture and just the town feel. But for me, it was about how welcoming it was. And that's what really drew our entire family over here. Although we were in different towns, Haddonfield was kind of like the main artery that went through. I had 4 brothers. We always wanted to be the Jackson 4. I wanted to be the iteration of Michael Jackson. I always wanted to be an entertainer. And to that degree, if you asked me what it was like when I was small and I was growing up and what did I want to do, that was it, to watch the artists of Motown or just, watch the incredible talent that, this generation was bringing to society. I just wanted to be a part of that. But the reality of it is that I was a much better writer. So for me, I always wanted to write. And throughout my career, journalism and writing has always been central to it. And even still today, I enjoy doing it very much. Life is always about evolving. For me, I've always wanted to write a book. There's a very famous book in the hospitality industry called Hotel. Arthur Haley was this author who wrote the book, and it was an amazing, true-to-life story. And as much as I enjoyed the story that it told about the St. Gregory Hotel in New Orleans, one of the things I always wanted to do was to write the Black version of that book. And for me, in the future, that's something that I would like to do. And I'd like to tell the story of Black people in the hotel industry in a way that has never really been authentically presented. And having worked so long in that industry, knowing of so many incredible icons who've come through that industry, that's been an aspiration that I have. And since I still enjoy writing, I still see that very much on my horizon. So when I went to high school, I really only enjoyed one thing, and it was eating. So when I participated in our high school newspaper when I was in Philadelphia, and I did the KYW News Study program here in Philadelphia, and I was inspired to become a writer, but I was discouraged because, back in the late 70s, there wasn't a lot of opportunities, especially for Black people if you wanted to be a noted, journalist or reporter. So when I spoke with my advisor when I was in high school, he asked me what else did I want to do, and that's when I said eat. And he encouraged me to consider going to Johnson & Wales University in Providence, Rhode Island, because they had a hospitality program. And I went there and I fell in love with it. So for me, when I went to college, I still had this aspiration to write, but I fell in love with the hospitality industry. It was without any doubt in my DNA. I knew that it was a career path that I would never feel like it would be work, that it would just be something that I do, despite what aspect of industry that I was in. So those two have always been pretty much a staple throughout my career. So, like I said, I grew up in Philadelphia, but when we moved to New Jersey, it was really interesting because I was just a few blocks away from downtown Haddonfield, on Park Avenue, where the apartments are, and I enjoyed it because I was fortunate to have an apartment that looked out over the park every day. So you had this beautiful view of greenery, and it's a garden state, right? So that just seemed like a natural fit. Later, when I moved to Haddon Heights, it was an amazing town to live in because it was just so connected to its historical roots. Plus, it was also very affordable. Like you had that Haddonfield feel, but you were not necessarily paying the Haddonfield prices. But when I finally had a chance to move here into Haddonfield, it gave me a sense of community. It gave me a sense of being welcome, and that I was, without any doubt, included. My apartment that I rented here, which I lived in for the entire 11 years that I was here, my landlord Sheila Zeidman lived in Cherry Hill, and she was amazing. Made it very affordable, made it very comfortable. I don't think she ever raised my rent more than like $5 a year, so it was a great experience. It's without any doubt a town that really lends itself to tourists. Like people discovered it, but now people really come here because they do want that feel. But I should tell a little bit of the story of what it was like when I moved to Haddonfield. So I was assistant general manager for a hotel in Philadelphia. It was a hotel apartment building, and there was a requirement that you had to live in the hotel. Not a real difficult thing to do, but it just made me think, what if I ever lost my job? And I remember when I first took the job, I had to dismiss somebody, which left them with 2 weeks to pack up and move. And I felt I never wanted to have that experience, presented to me. So I maintained my apartment in town, but I rented my apartment over here in Haddonfield. So I would spend half of my week in Haddonfield and the other half in Philadelphia. But what was interesting was that I didn't necessarily feel that as a black person that I was the first choice. And I'm a pretty determined kind of guy. And I remember when we were going through the process, filling out the paperwork, considering I was only going to use it as a reserve apartment, that there seemed to be some hesitation about it. So at the end of the day, I actually wound up bringing in first, last, and current month's rent in cash before they actually said, okay, we'll rent it to you. So I felt that was still a time when perhaps there was some sense of racism that may have existed, although it may not have been as blatant as you might think. It was definitely there. I felt that. Once I got into the apartment, I never really felt that it was as blatant as it was then. But as time has gone on, and certainly the demographics of Haddonfield has changed, but that sense of being welcome and inclusive has certainly become much more evident in the township. The idea that it has really matured in terms of its offering for tourists has really enhanced it as a destination. And, having worked in the tourism industry, and you see the assets that really develop in terms of shopping, as well as attractions, as well as restaurants, it really blends very nice for people who want to visit a location and take memories back. So it certainly has evolved, but there was a period in time when perhaps it was maybe a little bit more difficult. I went to the cemetery where my parents are buried, and I've always had inspiration from my parents. My father, they've always said that you can identify yourself through your parents. So my father was a boxer, so my ability to fight no matter what is based on the genes that I get from him. Boxers kind of have this, like, their mind won't stop because physically they feel so that they continue to fight. And then my mother always had this desire to do better, no matter what, that there is something better and you have to pursue it. So that combination of fight and wanting to do better has been the most influential and the most impactful for me, and I carry that with me every day. So my closest friend is a guy, and his name is Guy, Guy Weston. His father and my father were both military, and Guy and I are the exact same age. He lived one block away from me. But he had done a lot of historical investigation of his family, and the historical connection to slavery and this particular area has been his life's work, and he continues to do a great deal of historical discovery. So Guy's my best friend, still is today. It's funny, he sent me a text the other day. He said, we're both 65, which means we probably need to see each other a whole lot more often. But he's a really cool guy. So, the significant thing for me is, when I got married, we endowed a scholarship when my mother passed away. And every year we give out, financial resources for a student who'd be, unable to meet some of their financial obligations for school. So we always find that to be extremely fulfilling. And I think for me, the third thing is, what it's like to have a place that you can call home. As much as, it's strange, I grew up in Philadelphia, but I always tell people home for me is New Jersey. And the important part of how much I feel at home, even though I live in Cherry Hill now, driving through Haddonfield or, going to the train station is still as comfortable as it was when I lived here. So I think that idea of having a sense of home. Well, I was born in 1958. Probably the most historical event was, the assassinations that took place. So the assassination of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, John Kennedy. Those are extremely impactful things. It's interesting as we look at, where we are in society today and how I was able to interpret that when I was, 5, 7, 10 years old, and what that impact was on me. For me, it always gave me a sense of, feeling as though that we can do better as a society, that we can go beyond our differences and find ways to be able to connect. And I'm a strong believer in collaboration. I'm a strong believer in that no one person has the best idea. We all contribute to a better idea. But those were, for me, without any doubt, the most significant thing, other than the creation of the internet, but I don't want to go there. As an African American, the assassination of Martin Luther King. 2 years ago, I received the Martin Luther King Medal of Honor from freeholders here in Camden County. And it was amazing to receive that, in his name. But then when I went and actually had a chance to talk to other people who had received that medal, it gave you a chance to begin to draw a parallel with all the things that you have done in life and the things that Martin Luther King has done in his life. The idea that you want to make a difference, the idea that you want to improve and make, this is a better society. Those are the things that maybe subliminally were put into my mind when that happened. But it wasn't until I received that award that it became almost crystal clear. I did a lot of review of him and his speech writing to try and get a real, clearer sense as I moved closer to receiving the award. But I think that, for me, without any doubt, stands out as the most significant and the most lifelong lasting thing that was impacted during the course of my life. Well, I wouldn't mind being 6 foot tall, but I feel that the life that was presented to me was the life that I was supposed to have. I've always been a person who has looked at those circumstances that were presented in front of me and have used those to make my life better. There are clearly periods of, my life that have been challenges. My mother had Alzheimer's disease, and I was a strong caregiver for during the course of the time I was living in Haddonfield. And I look back and I think of just how incredible, horrible that was for me, but it also helped me to become a more compassionate person, a more understanding person. So, there are probably some things that I wouldn't necessarily had gone out and sought, but I think that those things contribute to who I am today. And in that case, I'm very happy with the life that I have. So the one that was true was because my father was military, we traveled a lot. We lived in Texas, we lived in Arizona, we lived in England, and in a lot of places that we went, we were the only black family, the only black family. And my parents always said that we're no different than anyone else. And they always said that to us. Even when we moved to Philadelphia and we were living in West Oakland, we were the second black family to move into that community. And while there may have been, people who taunted us, we were always, at the end of the day, reminded by our parents that we're no less than anybody. We're as equal as everybody. And even when I moved to Haddonfield, as I kind of explained about what I felt may have been a sense of racism, I never felt that I was out of place in this town, whether they were multi-million-dollar houses or small little, affordable rentals. I always felt like I had a place here, but that was, I think, what I got from my parents, that you belong and you should always present yourself in that way. I think the only thing that wasn't true was that Gilligan's Island was going to go on forever, because it never did. I don't know, they were, as parents, they were, maybe I should rephrase it. We lived what we felt was a very Brady Bunch life, right? 4 boys, 1 girl, dog, 2 parents, and the life was about as normal as life could be. So my sister died at 5, and you start to realize that it's not like what you saw on TV. It's very different. And I think to some degree my parents always gave us a sense of that life was just going to be this beautiful thing. And then later we found out that life just isn't like that. But like I said, you take those experiences and you grow as a person. I love horror movies. If anything, I was always afraid of Dracula or Frankenstein. I think growing up, if it was one thing that I was afraid of, was how fragile life is. And even today, it still's a fear, that, you could walk out and get hit by a car or something like that. And it's never been obsessed where I just can't function throughout the course of the day. But that would probably be something that was, one of the biggest fears that I've had. But like I said, some of that has come true. So to that degree, you have to face your fears. And that ability to face your fears, I think, allows you to become a stronger person. Acme. It's a staple for me in this community. The post office across the street, the dinosaur down the street, the toy shop. I mean, there are so many, the municipal building. I mean, there are so many things that I felt were iconic. I lived on 102 Potter Street, and, I tell everybody it was, the smallest mansion that you could find, right? Because, it had 3 small rooms, but it had a beautiful yard, and you had high ceilings. It had every feel that you could imagine of Haddonfield. So I went to school in Philadelphia. So I did take a Spanish course here at Haddonfield High at one time when I first moved over here, because I wanted to learn Spanish, and later found out that it was a lot more complicated than I thought. But I went to Olney High School in Philadelphia, and then I went to Johnson Wales University in Providence, Rhode Island. I always wanted to be able to make the most classic, basic, simple, delicious fried chicken meal. And I think I do a pretty good job at it. So I would definitely say it's fried chicken. So I moved to Haddonfield in 1991. And I met my husband in 1993. And he lived in Philadelphia, and I lived. I still had my apartment in town, and I also had the apartment over here. And we were talking about consolidating and living in one place. And I had said, "Oh, well, have you ever thought about living in Haddonfield?" And he really didn't have an interest in it because he liked that downtown Philadelphia feel. But I went on vacation with my mother to Florida, and I said, "Well, why don't you just stay and kind of get a feel of Haddonfield?" And having lived in downtown Philadelphia, he was amazed that people would say thank you and hello. And what really was the clincher was Acme. He went there. He couldn't get over how nice people were. I said, well, I did pay everybody before I left. But no, it was a really great experience. So he gave up his apartment. We moved into the apartment in Haddonfield, and we lived there all the way up until 2002, from 1996 to 2002. And it was, a great place for us because it was small, so you obviously get to know each other. We learned how to consolidate. But I want to go back when you said, do we have kids? So we didn't have kids. He had a bird called Oscar, and he was a Myers parrot, and Oscar kind of ruled the nest. He had a great view out of our window over the yard, the house that we lived in. So, but even today, though, for he and I, and we walked all throughout this town. I mean, there's not one street that we probably have not in one way or another walked through. It was always kind of part of our nighttime constitution to walk around and kind of experience and discover, Haddonfield. It was just such a great town to live in. It was a big difference from someone who lived in Center City, who now had, this normal life in this community that, treated everyone the same. And, aside from being black, it was very welcoming to the LGBTQ community. Before, it was maybe even fashionable for people to do it. We never felt uncomfortable, during the course of the time that we were here. So it left me with a lot of good memories, but even today, we still like to visit for that purpose. So when I worked in the hotel industry, I really didn't like some of the demands of, like when I worked in the hotel, I managed the housekeeping department at this one property, and we had 80, 90 housekeepers. That was just very hard work to try and get everybody on the same page. But throughout my career, I've had a lot of opportunities to do different things. So I worked in the hospitality industry, directly in operations and hotels and such. Later, I went to work for a nonprofit organization in Philadelphia called the Opportunities Industrialization Center. It was workforce development for the hospitality industry. Absolutely loved it. To be able to find a way to help people get an entry point into this industry was amazing. And then I moved to Temple University. I worked there for about 13 years. Handling the career development for students in the School of Tourism, and then later with the Fox School of Business, placing and coordinating opportunities for their graduate level students. And then from there, I worked for the Philadelphia Convention and Visitors Bureau, promoting Philadelphia. And, if I were to say what was probably one of the most rewarding experiences, it was that, to be the champion and the face and the voice of why people should come to Philadelphia and experience the diversity that the city has. That was just a dream job for me, and was fantastic. And then most recent, leading an organization called Tourism Diversity Matters, which was a national organization that focused on diversity in the tourism industry across the country. But, my roots have always been in some way or another, besides writing, connected to education. It's amongst the things that I really like to do.
Always be proud of what you've overcome, and always be proud of all the battles you've won, and always be proud of all of your darkest days, the tears you held back when you walked away, and always be proud of your mom and your dad, and whatever affair that they once had. Always be proud of your very first kiss, and always be proud of every friend that you miss.